Hey everyone, welcome to Card Cafe here, back with a full deck profile this time for set 13 for a deck I have featured on the channel a few times but hadn't actually gotten around to doing a full deck profile for. That is Unica / Bico Masque, the other Dark States Masque deck, one of the many, now that I say that. It's a fun deck. I like this deck. I've been playing it for a while. I hadn't had a chance really to do a deck profile just because there were other things that I wanted to cover, and also I knew that there was additional support coming out for this deck later down the line in both set 12 and set 13, and I knew it would be better to focus on that full deck profile once we had all of the cards for it. So here we are. We have set 13, all the new cards for this deck are out. This deck feels like it is complete now. So let's talk about what this deck does. Let's get started with our good old-fashioned ride line here. So the original ride line, we're definitely still sticking with this. I know some people were talking about mixing in the Evil M ride line since you get that immediate search for a trigger. It's an interesting idea. I don't hate it, but I think there's some good skills that this ride line has that's hard to argue with. So sticking with it now, but let's talk about what it actually does. So as always, your starter when you ride over going second, draw a card. Really here for the aesthetics, got to keep in line with the other ones. So that's what we get. Now the grade 1, when you ride over the grade 1, you get to soul charge 2. And if you soul charged a critical trigger specifically, you draw a card. So that's not going to happen all of the time, but when it do, it's a nice, reward for the feel bad moment of soul charging a trigger. That's a crit. And in this deck, soul charging a crit is actually kind of what you want to be doing. So that's good. And plus just the soul charge 2 in general is nice. There's a good amount of soul blast in this deck. So getting that early soul is nice. We like that. And then the grade 2, when you ride over the grade 2, has got the cool skill of you can bounce out 2 cards from your ride line to the rear guard circle. So you usually just pick these 2 and get to call them out when you ride over it with the grade 3, which is useful because both of these have good rear guard skills as well. The grade 1 lets you bind a trigger out of your soul if your opponent's at grade 3, and then she gets 10,000 power, so that's great. She holds an 18k beater or booster, which is always nice. And then the grade 2 for a Counterblast 1 lets you take 2 triggers from your drop zone and put them into the soul. She gets 5,000 power. So good for setting up your soul, making sure you got triggers in there, ideally crits, and making yourself better numbers by becoming a 15k. So really strong. Like to be able to just make a free column when riding up to grade 3. So that's why I like this ride line. It's hard to argue just getting a free half a board for just going up to grade 3. But now the first main grade 3 of the deck is the original Astronomica Unica, which is an interesting card, to say the least. When she's got an interesting effect. So she's got a few things going on. Firstly, is just when you soul blast out a trigger specifically for her ability, you can give a unit 5,000 power for each trigger soul blasted. So kind of talk a little bit about that more as we go along because it'll make more sense, which is when she attacks, you soul blast 3. So right there, that's what we're talking about with this effect. You soul blast 3, so if you soul blast 3 triggers, you get to give 3 instances of 5,000 power to anyone on your board. You can give it to her, give it to the rear guards, doesn't matter. It's 3 different instances of 5. You can stack them all up, whatever you want to do. So you soul blast 3, assign out powers based on the triggers that you soul blasted out, and any critical triggers you specifically soul blasted go to your bind zone, which is why you want critical triggers in your soul. And depending on how many critical triggers are in your soul, after you have done that, you get various number of effects. The first is if you have 1 critical trigger in your soul, if you have 1 critical trigger in your bind zone, you get to retire an opponent's rear guard. Then if you have 2 critical triggers in the bind zone, she gains a crit. And if you have 3 critical triggers in the bind zone, she gains +1 drive. So if you have 3 critical triggers that you have bounded out, you retire an opponent's rear guard, she gets a crit, and she gets triple drive. So a pretty good aggressive skill if you're going first, even now, just to be like, well, If I just Soul Blasted 3 crits, I can just give her 15,000 power if I really want to. She was 28 by herself, triple drive with a crit. That's kind of scary if your opponent's on grade 2. So a good pressure unit, and just good for setting up your bind zone and getting cards in there. And it's just a card that it's an early game attack your opponent doesn't necessarily want to take, right? Like a lot of time you're in the early game, your opponent's first grade 3 turn, their Vanguard swing, you're probably just taking it. Not necessarily with this, not when she has triple drive and a crit. So solid card, definitely not quite the powerhouses that some of the decks is, but definitely not bad. If you have to be stuck on a grade 3 in a mass deck, there are certainly worse ones. But this is a mask deck, and so we are, of course, running 4 copies of Bico Masque, her alternate form. I don't know why her name is Bico and not Unica, but I don't make the rules here. I just follow them. So we have Bico Masque. Just like all the other mask units, she can only be ridden from a card with she can only be rode from a card with her in her name. So either this one or this one. It's a weird name. I'm not gonna try and say it. She's got a couple of effects. The first, just like all mask units, is she has the act once per turn. Remove the old copy of Unica from either your hand, the soul, or the drop zone. Remove it from the game. If you do, you get to retire one of your opponent's rear guards, and she gets +1 drive. So right out of the gate, again, you're doing similar to what the original one does. You're popping an opponent's rear guard, you're getting +1 drive. So it's very easy in this deck to maintain triple drive on the majority of your attacks, which is good. It's a main way of just gaining hand advantage in this deck is by just always having triple drive. So I like that a lot. But then its second skill is when she attacks, you counterblast 1, Soul Blast 3, so there's your 3 Soul Blasts again. And again, any crits that you Soul Blast are bound. So add into that effect, and you get to choose one of your rear guards and stand it. Plus, for every 2 critical triggers in your bind zone, both her and the unit she stood give 5,000 power. So, for example, if you have 2 crits in your bind zone, she and the unit she stood give 5,000 power. If you have 4 crits in your bind zone, she and that unit get 10,000 power, and so on and so forth. So a solid skill for attack deck that is very consistent at being 4 attacks and also making pretty good numbers. She's getting 5k almost immediately. It won't be long before you have 10k, in which case if you're on a Persona right turn by herself, she's 33 triple drive. And restanding a rear guard and giving it 10k. And in this deck, your numbers are pretty solid, so it's going to be a pretty high attacking number. So really solid card. I like her a lot. You're going to be going into her as fast as you can over her, and as much as I just talked about how this isn't a bad card to be stuck on, Bico is better than Unica just for the 4 attacks, and that is much easier to hit. Notice that the restand isn't tied to you having crits in the bind zone. You just get power based on the crits in the bind zone, which was what makes her better than Unica, is that if you got a little screwed, if your deck was kind of bricking on you a little bit and you just didn't see your critical triggers, her effect will still activate. She'll still restand a rear guard. She'll still get triple drive. She'll still retire an opponent's rear guard. You're just not going to get the extra power, which is fine. All the other effects matter more than that. So Bico is a really strong card. I like her a lot, and 4 copies because you definitely want to be in this immediately and Persona riding as often as possible. And then we're running 2 extra copies of original Unica as discard fodder for her skill to be able to get triple drive. We're not running a max of 4 copies of old Unica, partially just because there's no room. This is a very tight space. And then also, if you miss the Bico skill to remove, get triple drive, and retire, it's not the end of the world. The more important skill is the restanding a rear guard to get 4 attacks. So we like the triple drive. We like getting the triple drive as much as we can, but if we miss it, it's not the end of the world, so it doesn't feel like you really need to run 4 copies of this, where it's not doing anything else for you. So I find 3 copies is fine. You'll still get it 3 times, and very rarely will there be a game where you go through more than 3 Bico Masters. So I think 3 is fine. And then obviously this wouldn't be a mask deck without the mask itself. We're running 3 copies of the Mask of Hydrogen. For anyone who doesn't know what this does yet, it's got 2 effects. The first is when you play it like a normal order, you check top 5 for a card with Mask in its name or Dragon Tree. In this case, you're searching for Bico Masque almost entirely, or the grade 2 that we'll talk about in a little bit. Add it to your hand. So simple search effect, great for just searching for your Bico Masques and really to make sure that you have them. And then its other skill is in the drop zone during the main phase. You put this into your soul, take a card with Mask in its name, and write it over a card that doesn't. And if your opponent's at grade 3 and you had not Persona Road yet, it counts as a Persona Ride. So great going second effect. If your opponent's at grade 3, you just get to Persona Ride immediately on your first grade 3 turn. Excellent skill. Makes the Mask decks better, if not great. It certainly would affect that is the best thing the Mask decks have going for them is that going second first grade 3 turn effect. So 3 copies, you don't really need more than that. You've got the grade 3, we'll talk about a little bit that searches, and you can go through your deck kind of fast in this deck. So I find 3 copies is fine. And the main reason is because we are actually not done with the grade 3s and we're not done with orders. We are running the set 12 Almagest Celesphere order. I like this card a lot. This card is really good. It came out in set 12 and did a lot for the decks. It has a lot of really good effects. And it's free. And you know, if you watch my Ezel videos, you know how much I like free orders. So let's talk about what this one does. Firstly, if you have a Vanguard with Estrella in its name, you can just play this. That's the only requirement. And you just immediately countercharge. So right off the bat, you play this. If you're on either one of these 2 cards, countercharge 1. Great. Fantastic. We love that. This deck does have a good amount of counterblast, so it's good to have some countercharge in here. But then you also get to take 3 triggers from your drop zone. It doesn't have to be crits. Obviously, you'd like it to be, but it can be any trigger. And just take 3 of them, just shove them right into your soul. So basically just to select a soul charge 3 that you get to pick. It's not a random soul charge 3. So that's another really strong effect because it's also 3. And then finally, if you have removed a card from the game, so essentially if you have used Bico Masque's skill to remove old Unica from the game, your Vanguard gets a crit. So it gives Bico Masque even more pressure. It gives her a crit so that she can be like 33 triple drive with a crit. And just gaining all of the last effect that she didn't get from original Unica. So really great utility card. It countercharges, puts triggers from your drop zone into the soul, and gives Bico Masque a crit. It's just a solid card. We love the utility of it. We'll talk more about what we're going to be doing with that card later when we talk about the extra 4 slots, but 2 for right now. And then finally on to our grade 2s. Talk about the new card we got that made this deck very strong and much more consistent is the set 13 triple rare, the Red Eye card. I'm not going to try and say the rest of her name. I'm sorry, these names are hard. But anyway, the names aren't important, it's the skills that matter. She's got 2. So, the first one is when she's placed, if you have a Vanguard with Mask in its name, so you do have to be on Bico Masque, you counterblast 1 and you get to check the top 7 cards of your deck and choose 1 grade 3 less card from among them and call it to the rearguard circle. So great, we love a good just superior call, check top 7 call, but on top of that, you also then get to take a trigger unit from your drop zone and bind it. So great acceleration, don't even have to get a crit into your soul, you can just immediately bind it right out of the drop zone. So that's great. Adding to your bind count, getting triggers away, and calling to the board. So just a fantastic card for that utility, but that's not all it does. It also has a continuous effect of if you have 2 triggers, or no, 3 triggers, 3 or more triggers in your bind zone, this gets 10,000 power. So just a solid beater. It's automatically going to be 20k on rearguard by itself very quickly in this deck. And then if that wasn't enough, like we talked about with Bico powering it more, just for having 2 crits in there, it's going to restand, become a 25 by yourself, boosted by a grade 1. That's a 33k line, 43 on a Persona Ride turn. hitting great numbers for getting over 20k shields. So I like that a lot. 4 of, great restand target, great utility for filling up your board, not having to commit cards from hand. Just a fantastic card, definitely a 4 of. The other new card that we got specifically for Unica was the Opera Star from set 13. 3 of for this. It's got pretty good effect here. So the first is if you have a grade 3 Vanguard with Estrella in its name, so you can be on either one of these 2 for this skill. You can counterblast 1 and draw a card. It's really just great for adding cards to your hand. I don't really have to, it's a counterblast 1 draw card. Really good, like there's not much to say about that. But then also it's got the continuous effect. That's the same as Bico's Restand in the sense of for every 2 triggers in your bind zone, she gets 5,000 power. So another great restand target. She's just scaling up with that skill. If you've got 4 crits in your bind zone, she's getting 10,000 power and then gets 10,000 power from Bico's Restand. So it becomes a 30k by herself. So just another good restand target for the numbers and is adding some draw power to this deck. Not running 4 of because Counterblast can get a little tight in this deck, and we already have the free 10k that we're getting from this, and I value her Counterblast skill a little bit higher than this one for the search from the top. But Counterblast 1 is good, so we definitely, a Counterblast 1 to draw is good. So we run 3 copies of her. And then to round out the grade 2s, everyone's favorite Mask Searcher, Skullcamda. When placed on rearguard, Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, search your deck for the good old Mask of Hydrogen and add it to your hand. And then you also get to get a Dragon Tree marker and put it onto the board. Dragon Tree markers, for anyone who doesn't know, is just a permanent marker on the board that gives whatever unit is in that spot 5,000 power, provided that you were on, in this case, Bico Masque. It's good for just generating numbers. Really, it's here for the mask. So really, it's essentially running 3 more copies of the mask. We have 6 copies of the masks in this deck with this. So 3 copies of it. I don't feel like you need 4. So 3 is working just fine for me. Grade 1s, we're running 4 of the main boy, Capricornus. Pretty simple but strong effect in this deck. When you boost a Vanguard with Alma Jester in its name. Important to note there for the Alma Jester tag specifically is that your whole ride line has the Alma Jester tag. So this is live immediately, which is really nice for the early game. As long as it's boosting and you have that Vanguard with the Alma Jester tag, you take any trigger from your drop zone, from the drop zone or from your hand and put it into the soul. If you put it from your hand, you get to draw a card. So really great for just accelerating that soul, making sure you have the triggers in your soul to then soul blast out to bind. And it's also great for the early game, especially because then it just is making good numbers, because what you'll do a lot of the time is just throw it right behind the Vanguard. So you'll just have a column like this and just be swinging for 16. Hard to block, and then just getting triggers from your hand that you might have gotten or that you already guarded with and put into your soul. So great, consistent card. It's your best booster in the deck, and also for just making sure you have triggers set up in your soul to be able to soul blast out. Next, we're running 1 copy of the Kitty Cat from set 12, the generic. This is your put 2 ride line cards back into the ride line face up, and if you're guarding with it, plus 15k shield, so it's a 20k shield. And then if you're playing it on rear guard, in this particular case, you countercharge 1. So nice, we have an extra countercharge in this deck, as I mentioned, because it's a little counterblast heavy. So we like to have a little bit more countercharge, and having another 20k shield is also great in this meta in particular. Only 1 copy of this, because this is a mask deck and you're going to be removing the grade 3 in your ride line from the game from the Bico Masque skill. So you're only going to be able to activate this skill once. So only 1 copy of it. That's working out well. Just one little nice tech that I like having because I need the 1 spot and he fits it well. Lastly, this should shock no one. You got your Sanctitude, you got your 3 Nation Perfect Guards. Sanctitude gets around guard restricts and triple drive. The text triple drive, not Bico Masque, +1 drive. And these get around having 1 card or less in hand, not having to discard. So, you know, Fantastic skills. I've talked about them plenty. We all know and love that lineup. Let's talk about something more exciting, which is the trigger lineup. Now, this deck is heavily reliant, as you noticed, on having crits and making sure that you can bind crits and put them in your bind zone. So to no one's surprise, we are running the full 8 crit lineup. Fortunately, this is a deck that I feel like really hurt with the announcement that you cannot run more than 8 crits in your deck. I understand why they do not allow 12 crits. There are a lot of decks like this one that I think would get a little scary if 12 crits were allowed. So 8 crits, you definitely run the max because having the crits to your bind is just too important to run any less than 8. So we run Ace. But then the other trigger that we are running is the front trigger, 3 copies. Since set 13, I have said this a lot, and I will keep saying it. I want 20k shields. I want a lot of 20k shields, especially in this deck where you have a good amount of 0 shield cards in the orders and the grade 3s. So I want the extra shield value. And plus, you have a decent amount of plussing between the triple driving, the aura, the opera singer, and then calling to the board with the red eye governor. So I think you can get away with the fronts. I think it works out well. So 8 crit, 3 front, full aggression lineup. Try and just kill them as fast as possible. And that's what we go with. And then heals is pretty in line with what you've seen so far from me for set 13. Get your 2 generics for any situation, and then get 1 of each of the crit and restand, because you've got crits and restand abound in set 13 among all of the tier 1 decks. So I like having them for emergency situations where I would die without even being able to block a restand or block a inherit crit. So that's what we're running with. Now the big question, OT reveal. Are we running the Dark States over trigger or one of the generics? And the answer is yes, we are running the blue generic. The Dark States over trigger, while good in certain decks, particularly Greedon and Evil Eye, it's not as good in this deck. This deck does not have a restanding Vanguard, so the 10k and the crit for the rest of the game is less relevant in this deck, especially in this deck where I'm already inherently gaining crits on my Vanguard a good amount of the time. So what I do want is another critical trigger in the deck. I know it doesn't count in the bind zone, but it's a 9th crit that I can check and give to a rear guard. More specifically, my Vanguard already has a crit. I want to give crits to my rear guards. So like that, and then also putting a card back into your hand can be very good in this deck just for building your board to make sure you have pieces, especially this Legolas gets removed a lot, so having more of this, just put it back into your hand and call it back to fill your board back up, or putting the Cellosphere order back into your hand after you use it to be able to put it back and use it again. Just good targets for your drop zone for reviving, so we run blue OT in this. I was doing red OT for a little bit, and while occasionally having 5 attacks in this deck is nice, so you don't have the ability to get 5 attacks otherwise. Like I've talked about before, where this isn't a deck where you have a rear guard that can really benefit from being restood and attacking again, I tend to shy away from that. I prefer to just have the utility of putting the card back into my hand and having a 9th critical trigger essentially in the deck. So blue OT for now. We'll see if that changes with any additional rear guards that we get. That's your 46 cards. We're still a week or 2 out from the update to 50 cards. So if you're desperate to play Unica this weekend, this is your deck. This is what I recommend, while it is only legal to play 46 cards. But once we get the update, I know for sure I am actually bumping Cellosphere up to 3. This order is just too good. I want to run more of it, so we're running a 3rd copy of it. If we weren't a mass deck, I'd run 4 of this, honestly, but we're running the Mask of Hydrogen, and I don't want more 0 shield cards. So 3 for now. If the deck changes drastically at any point, we might go up to 4 of this, but for now, 3 copies. And because we are adding another 0 shield card, I am putting back in 3 copies of Peak Griffin. Really solid card from back in the kind of the original support we got for Unica, and he's going to be coming back once we have the update. He puts 2 cards from your drop zone, 2 triggers from your drop zone, puts them into the soul when placed on rear guard, and gets 5,000 power. So similar to your ride line grade 2, but doesn't cost a counterblast. It's just free, so we like that. But honestly, more importantly right now for me, why he's coming back is his second skill, which is if you have 2 crits in your bind zone, he is a 10k shield in your hand. So he's just extra shield value, able to hopefully keep you alive a little bit longer because you can just throw him down as a 10k shield and block attacks that they didn't think that you'd be able to block. So he's coming back for the shield mainly, and then also just having a little bit more extra put cards from your drop zone back into your soul. So that's going to be my 4 extra cards. One card I was considering is the set 11 generic. I think I have around here somewhere. Let me see. Yes. This card. I was considering this. This is definitely not a bad option because of all the orders that you're running. She's the one where when placed Soul Blast 1, if you played an order, check top 5, call a card. So more superior calling, which can be good. And then she also has the secondary effect of when she attacks Soul Blast 3, draw a card, gets 5. So a little bit more draw power, which is good. The only problem is Soul Blast 3 is pretty heavy when you're already Soul Blasting 3 for the Vanguard. You do have a good amount of put cards to Soul, but I don't know if it's enough to sustain 2 different instances of Soul Blast 3 in the same turn. So that's why she's not going in yet. But again, depending on how the deck maybe shifts up later down the road, if we do get any other additional support, I could maybe see an argument just for the additional superior calling abilities because you are running a good amount of orders. Once we go to 50 cards, I'm going to be running 6 orders. So I can maybe see an argument for that. But for right now, those are the 4 that are going in next week for me. But yeah, it's a fun deck. Is it a top contender? No, I'm not going to sit here and try and say or make some sort of argument that this deck keeps up with the big 3, but it's fun. And that's the main thing I've talked about before here. I enjoy playing decks that I have fun with, and I'm enjoying this deck. I think it's fun. It's consistent. It's a lot more consistent now with the tools that we've gotten from set 12 and 13. Like similar to what I've talked about with a few decks now with set 13, the deck feels complete. This deck now is at the point where it feels that like if you got 0 support, if this didn't get any more support going forward, it's a good spot. The deck doesn't feel like it's missing anything anymore. It feels like we have the tools that we need to properly play this deck. It may not be as crazy as some other decks, but it feels like it can do what it needs to do. So it's fun. I'll keep playing it for now. And yeah, that's what I got to say so far about Bico. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot them in the comments. And otherwise, you'll be hearing from us soon. Thanks. Bye.